November 2nd, Tufton Borough Board of Selectmen work session. And the primary business to do at this work session today is to receive the report on the road service management system paving study that was recently completed by Lakes Region Planning Commission. So,
Okay.
Dave, Aaron, welcome. We've been anxiously looking forward to
Thank you.
receiving this.
As you know, we were asked to work on a road surface management system assessment and report. And what we want to do here is, and this utilizes a statewide method, and what we want to present to you, it's looking at the entire network of the roads in Tufton Borough. There are some options, and we want to present to you network-wide what those options are, and get your feedback on that. And we've done a bunch of work on it, and then what we are looking at is taking what you have, what you tell us, the feedback, and we have the information, and then just wrap that up in a final report to you. This in itself is not a final report. It is showing you what the network, when we ran 3 different options, 3 different scenarios, this is what we got. And with that, pass it over to Aaron David, our assistant planner, who did most of the assessment and the forecast, and then has done most of the bulk of the forecasting on this, and take it from there, and we'll address questions and concerns as we go along.
Yeah, so the beginning part is just I'm gonna run through the generals of what we did through the process, just to refresh everyone's memories. So we work with SAID, statewide asset data exchange system. This is what we used for our guide to assess. This is also what we go through to use the forecasting software. And then there's just a list of some benefits we'll go over, how we've used ArcGIS online, and what kind of road layers we're using through them, and then what was part of the assessment guide, and pavement preservation and treatment options that I was looking at, and then finally the forecasting, which is what you guys are all waiting for. Basically, you'll get to know the mileage of your road system if you don't already. It was all assessed the same way throughout the entire town and the entire state. People are assessing the same way. So this forecasting hopefully will assist in budgeting and planning throughout 10 years. And you can plan projects around each other knowing what's in the future. So this is what we use, ArcGIS Online. And through that is we use an iPad and we just upload it so it's all online. We have this, I understand this isn't Tufton Borough, but we have road layers that are already in quarter-mile segments, so that's what we work with. We don't really alter those quarter-mile segments, so that's how they're broken up. And then in our assessment guide, we're looking at different types of cracking, potholes, rutting, overall roughness of the road, and then I have gotten your input for local factors such as importance and traffic volume. And so pavement preservation is basically saying if you take care of your roads when they're still good, you're spending less money in the long run. So $1 here eliminates a lot of dollars in the future. So these are some treatments that we have the options of choosing. This little sheet that I gave you that has the processes, square yard costs, and PCI limit. This is primarily what's used during the forecasting process. When a road gets to a certain PCI limit, that is what those numbers are, and it's an accurate treatment that you can use for it during that time.
And those costs come from what source?
Those come from DOT and All-State Paving and T-Squared, so they all work together throughout and took averages throughout the state of what the costs are, and that's how they came up with those. So you guys have a copy of this map in front of you because I know it would be hard to see. This is what we came up with. This is what your current conditions look like after the assessment that was done this summer.
So the reference numbers on the map, is that the quarter mile?
Yep, that is. And so it works from one end of the road to the other end, and then it says the road name, and each number is quarter mile segment, so that's how I assign treatments to each thing. So when you'll see in more detailed reports, you'll see Union Wharf 1, and it'll have a treatment, Union Wharf 2, and it'll have a treatment. So I have to do each quarter mile segment. Are there any questions about that map?
So the key is showing what?
Yeah, so basically this map is showing currently what the pavement condition index is. So it's either, it was broken up into the 4 different sections. This can change, so once we run through the forecasting, these colors can change to reflect what the roads will become looking like. So if a road is red, like let's say this corner is red, and then we do a full depth
And
on that.
That's on Dane Road.
Yep, it'll turn to blue. So you can see over time how your overall network is going to improve.
What does each color mean?
So red is pretty poor roads. That's like it got rated really bad, cracking and rutting for the majority of the road.
Okay.
Yellow is, it's all right, but it needs some work, and it's past the point of just crack sealing. It needs something further than that. Green would be, it's decent. It's like nobody has really a problem driving on it, but it could need some preventative maintenance. And then blue is like, it's real good right now.
So if I look at the processes chart,
Yep.
right, and the coding, then this would suggest that for minor and major crack sealing, we shouldn't be doing that on any roads that aren't blue. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, so if we're sealing cracks on green or yellow roads, it's not having a,
You can do it. It
Right.
probably will prolong the life of the road. However, it's a short-term fix because down the road you're going to have to pay more money, and the crack sealing kind of, at that point, wouldn't be really worth your money at that time.
And what did you come up with for the total mileage?
Total mileage is 28 miles.
And this is
Right.
just paved
Just
roads.
paved
Yep.
town and paved roads.
So close to, well, more than 50% of our roads are either yellow or red
Currently.
currently.
And then, so that's where forecasting comes in. We ran, so basically I wanted to put this in here because Molten Borough, when we first assessed Molten Borough, they also had a lot of reds and yellows and some blues. And then by the 10-year forecasting, it's saying that the majority of the roads are going to be blues and greens. So
That, the road on the on the left-hand side, the left-hand map is the initial PCI, and then the map on the right is 10 years out, if they're following the strategies that were worked out with the road agent. For example, that right-hand side, Severance Road is over here. And this was done a year and a half ago. And there's a good deal of yellow and red on there. As you well know, probably know, they've done a lot of work
On
on Severance to bring it up, and if they maintain it, it'll, 10 years from now, it'll still be in the blue category.
it's not saying also that every road needs to be blue by the end. It has to do with your budget and what that allows. So there's been other towns that we've worked with that it turns out most of them are greens at the end and some blues. And even some yellows sometimes. So this, and it might be hard to see, so I gave you guys these sheets printed out. These are 3 different scenarios that were forecasted in the program. So the overall is that the first scenario that was gone through was basically a $10,000 a year increase in the budget for 10 years. So in the forecasting program, we cannot write in the budget and then have it calculate things for us. It has to be, you plug in treatment for each segment and then try to get the budget as close as possible. So even though it's a $10,000 a year increase, it might seem a little bit off. But that was the first scenario that we ran through.
So
Yep.
for that scenario, essentially, if I'm reading this right, it shows that will maintain about where we're at now,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So in 2019, we're at a PCI of 70.04,
Mhm.
and in 2028, it goes to 71.05,
Yes.
which is essentially the same.
Yep.
With a little dip in between, yeah.
Mhm.
And we're still only maintaining an average of 2 miles a year.
Yeah. So things to look at in these charts is this top, or the second row down, not the year, but this first row of numbers is if we did nothing to the roads, this is how it calculates what the roads will look like in 10 years. So it's going to be the same for each scenario. And then
So it drops from 70 down to 45.
Yep. And then after treatments are put into the system, it's going to tell you what the PCI looks like every year and how many miles of roadway that you cover and the budget that goes along with it. So what I found was $10,000 a year. This forecasting system takes in consideration inflation. So things that might cost a certain amount in 2019 is going to cost a lot more to do in 2028. And so that resulted in the same PCI. By the ending year, the road PCI valued from 33 to 100. So they were still a wide range of colors on the map.
Currently, the lowest, there are some roads that are near 100,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a few segments that are about 36 on the PCI.
Mm-hmm.
And as a network, it works out to about 70 for the PCI currently. But you have that, you would have with a $10,000 a year increase from the roughly $200,000 budget that we currently have. We're talking about still having a range that goes from, I mean, on the PCI, a range that goes from some roads from 33 up to about 100.
Any questions about that one? We can go over
So there's
questions.
no change in the demographic, if you will, on that first set of numbers. At the end of the 10-year cycle here, 2028, we're still going to have half of our roads in yellow or red.
You're gonna have about the same amount. It might be different roads by that time, but
Okay.
it's gonna look generally the same on the map. You'll be maintaining what you have currently. The next scenario is an increase of 7.5% per year in budget. So what that looks like is a PCI starting at 71, and then it's gonna jump up to 78 by the end of the 10 years. The PCI by the end of the 10 years, the lowest PCI is going to be a 63. So that's improvement of the overall network. Some things to point out with this one. The ending year is 8.88 miles of roadway that was treated with a slightly larger budget. This is mostly crack sealing probably. A lot of the roads that were, the majority of this forecasting scenario had to do with mid-range treatments that didn't last as long as the higher range prices. That, for example, there's not a lot of full depth reconstruction going on in the second scenario. There's a lot of shorter range fixes. So by
You'll
the
see that
end,
on a future slide.
what?
You'll see that on the next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the
We
end,
only-
there's a lot of roads that are gonna need some help.
You're only talking the difference between 10,000 and 15,000. I mean, a 7.5% increase on 219,000 is what, 15.5? So it's not an enormous jump in revenue put into the roads. 7.5%.
Yep, but it makes a difference.
Yeah.
It definitely does. But like I said, by the end of 10 years, you might be looking at having to have some TLC on the roads because there were shorter term fixes, but they would last that long.
But for that same 7.5%, you could use a different mix of solutions in the interim,
So you could,
right?
it might change the budgets for the year. So if we were to do full depth reconstruction instead of mid-range pricing options, then you're gonna get a lot less mileage treated, and therefore your overall PCI network's probably gonna decrease because you're treating a lot less of your entire road system. So in this one, it was trying to get every single road treated at least once in those 10 years, and then the higher priority roads based on the local importance and traffic volume, those most of those got a second treatment within those 10 years. So like the through roads, Ledge Hill, Union Wharf, Sodom, all those are we're going to try to keep those nice in this scenario, but the other smaller neighborhoods,
It would surely way we're not keeping that nice.
in the future years, some of the neighborhoods are going to probably dwindle a little bit. The third scenario is a 10% budget increase per year. So this one, you're going to go from a 71 PCI and you're going to jump up to an 83.5. The ending PCI range, so for every single road in this scenario, by the end of 10 years, is going to have a 70 or higher PCI. So it brings the entire road network up with every segment. There's a lot of preventative maintenance in this, but there's a lot of full depth reconstruction, so you have that mixture because the budget allows for that. Have the long-term solutions for a lot of those roads. And then in the end, there's a lot of just crack sealing and maybe overlays to just maintain what you've already put money into. This one, of course, treats a lot more of mileages of roads. So in this scenario, every road is treated at least once in the 10 years, and then the majority is treated again in the 10 years. So most of your roads in the last scenario is going to get treated twice in the 10 years. So they're all going to see some TLC.
Yeah, and that treats about, whereas the first scenario treated about 30 miles of roadway, the last scenario treats about 50 miles of roadway.
Any questions on that one? Okay, so this is kind of overwhelming, but same scenarios, and it's just broken up differently so you can see what's actually being done in each scenario and the money that goes into it. So in the first scenario, you're gonna do a lot of full depths because you're waiting to get things done until later time, but you're getting a lot less mileage of roads completed. So a lot of roads are, in those 10 years, a lot of the roads in the first scenario aren't even being touched because you're trying to take care of the higher priority roads than that. In the second scenario, there's a little bit of everything, but like I said, there's going to be a lot of milling and overlays in that. And then you put some money towards full depth, but it's going to lay mostly in the mid-range, so you can do your mid-priced treatments that don't last as long. So like I said, towards the end, you might have to start putting a little bit more money into full depth. And then your last one is a lot of the higher priced items that are going to last you well past those 10 years. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah.
So a lot of a major reduction in I'm looking at the second scenario versus the third scenario. In the second scenario, you're spending $40,000 in the first 3 years in major crack sealing. In the third scenario, you aren't spending any money.
Mm-hmm.
You're just doing some minor crack sealing. So I'm not sure how that, are there major cracks that need sealing, or are there not major cracks that need sealing?
It depends on what you're going to address in the future. So in the second scenario, I wanted to make sure that things lasted until you had money to fully repair them. In the third scenario, I was worrying about repairing the top priority roads and making sure those are in really good conditions, and then maintaining those further along the way. So we didn't have to deal with those in the future years where it'd be more expensive to do. So we didn't do a lot of crack sealing in the third scenario, like I said, because we have these other treatments that we're going to do to them, so crack sealing isn't as necessary in the near future.
And is there an assumption, I know that when we did Brown Road just recently, we came into a lot of clay and rocks, other stuff when we did a major excavation of that road. And did you think about the underlying issues when you did
We
this?
don't take into consideration the geology underneath these roads.
Okay,
That's
so
not
you-
something the forecasting system can really tell.
So this is sort of.
So
this
that's the
is
wild
change.
card, is what you're gonna find once you start the
Yeah.
full depth.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is just a guide of what it should cost generally on average, and then like anything with roads, with building and everything.
And this is
there's-
based on New Hampshire numbers, not Iowa numbers?
Yeah, New
Okay.
Hampshire
Yeah.
numbers. Yep.
So it's the average New
Yeah.
Hampshire
Yeah.
geology.
Yep.
Skip, and this was put together in conjunction with New Hampshire DOT and the and UNHT Squared Technology Transfer. This booklet that Aaron passed out does have more detail about each of the strategies that are available through this modeling system. And it gives a bit more detail, and there are about a dozen and a half of these different strategies, some of which you may find, gee, this is useful, or this is something that we do all the time. You may find, well, we tried that and it didn't work particularly well. And in some cases, you may find there are definitely a few that, you know, they need to have bright sunshine for it to really, for the treatment to work well. But one of the things that I find helpful with this is it gives a life, not just only a unit cost, but it also gives life improvement. So it tells you how many months you can expect to get in terms of life out of this. So like a chip seal on page 6, it's looking at costing $235 a square yard, and this is a New Hampshire average, and it'll extend the life about 3 years. On the other hand, if it's useful and appropriate, a 1-inch overlay, hot mix overlay, on page 13, costs a bit more, but gives twice the length in terms of the road life. So those are all factor into what is appropriate, and there are some things, and I think there was some discussion that Aaron had with you, Jim, in terms of, you know, what are some of the things that are currently done, practices that are currently done, and might we try some different methods and see if they work, see if they may be useful in these cases. You know, we've worked with some communities that say, no, we'll never do that. That strategy. And others have been open to, you know, maybe that could work here.
To the best of your knowledge, do you know if 109 have had any kind of study like this done where we know if there's anything?
The state roads?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it would be nice to know how much money they're spending and the forecast for the future as well.
That's a good question. I mean, DOT has been leading this work with the municipalities. My presumption is that they are doing a similar sort of in-house assessment of their roads. Yes.
I can answer that.
Good.
After 7 years at the TAC meeting, after the meetings, I go for coffee with the engineers and whatnot,
Yeah.
non-adversarial. The people who work for the state are like you folks, have integrity and are intelligent and know exactly what the road is. For example, there are logs under the road 109A in Wolfboro. It's called a corduroy road. They're well aware of it. Like this, they are bound by legislators and a severe budget crunch. The state of New Hampshire does not want to invest in the roads. Unlike Tuftonboro, the Selectmen, the Budget Committee, the CIP, and at town meeting, what more can we do to support the building of the roads? It's so bad, for example, and this is an editorial comment, that within 3 years, when the potholes and the frost heaves are back in 109A, the shortcut is Dame Road, and it's destroying our road. But they'll break axles if they go by the school. Thank you.
So, in your algorithm, which I'm sure you provide us.
I don't have the algorithm. It's already built into the forecasting software.
So in the software, which I'm sure we'll get, you've got a range here of 0 to 44 on the red.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a little more refined when we get into the software? So we know that, for instance, a quarter mile of North Line Road is actually at 28.
Yeah, so I can provide, which I will provide, entire spreadsheet, and it's detailed by each segment of each year.
Go to the last spot. That's a sample of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So each cross neck road, you have the quarter mile segment that's labeled 2 and the one that's labeled 3. You're going to do full depth on both of them. This is about a quarter mile each, and the price for each of those. When I can export the entire assessment, it tells you the PCI for every single year during that 10-year period, after the treatments and before the treatment. So you're going to see what it looks like if we did nothing to it, and then once we've applied the treatment to it. So you're going to have all of how we rated the roads. So it has alligator cracking, that's high severity, high extent. You're going to see all of those aspects and all of the PCI throughout those 10 years for each segment.
So we'll be able to plug those numbers into our CIP. Capital improvements.
The spreadsheet will be there.
Right.
Yep.
The working through the software, we built into the contract to work with the town on an annual basis to do that. Access to the portal is limited. DOT was reluctant, I think, to.
So how does the information get to us?
I'll send it to you through an Excel sheet and then through a final report. And I'll have
And as we
And map.
adjust it over the course of time.
So every year we'll meet with you, and then you can report to us if you followed it at all, and if you followed some of it, or if you found something's not working, then you change that for that year, and we can change that in the forecasting system, and it's going to reflect what your roads should look like in the following years. So we can update it as time goes on every year.
And does that require a physical survey, or are you just gonna take the information from what we?
Just from what you've done. And then every 5 years, they recommend another assessment of the roads to see how it's actually holding up.
Yeah, and if you go back a couple of slides, looking at, again,
This one?
Yep, no, next one. Looking at the network, sort of summarize those, if you look at the sort of the 3 different colors, looking at mid-level, hot maintenance, very basic maintenance on this, and then the middle group is overlay, just basic repair and overlay, sort of mid-level, and then full depth reclamation at the bottom. In the first scenario, over 10 years, you're spending about $2 million. Second, you're spending about $3 million. And in the third, you're spending about $3.5 million. And
Over 10 years.
over 10 years. But if you look at the percentages here, that you're, in this first one, you're spending about 2% of your budget over 10 years on crack sealing and the very minor sorts of things, but you're spending, a little under 50% on repair and overlay, and over 50% on full depth reclamation, that sort of thing. So you get down to these 2 scenarios, those percentages change a bit. You've got about 10% on your maintenance and preservation. You're spending the 52% on repair and overlay, and 38% on full depth reclamation. Here, it's even less of a percentage on full depth reclamation and more on repair and overlay, those mid-level sorts of things. They're going to give you, they're not the most inexpensive, but they're moderate cost to give some extended life to the roads in that scenario.
There's part of this study that you don't have access to. When we do a road, there are other costs that you haven't touched, nor should you. I'll take, for example, Sodom Road, the busiest town road in town. It took 2.5 to 3 years, and our road agent found stumps, over 200 rocks, stumps. He found a culvert by field that was 2 different materials and why it hadn't collapsed 40 years ago. At Allen's Corner, he found wires from the original local, telephone, Roby's store. Just they didn't cut the wire and run it down the road back in just after World War II. They just squirreled it down there. I mean, even DigSafe didn't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
What he wanted to do in a shorter window, it took multiple years to do it.
Yeah.
Another example is our second busiest road, Ledge Hill Road, and has a lot of truck traffic.
Mm-hmm.
The green part, he purposely didn't reclaim. When you grind, he does the culverts, all that in the first section, then at $35,000 a mile reclaimed that. We couldn't do that because we needed to get it done, and that's green.
Mm-hmm.
But he also was wise in that it now is proof we need to reclaim the roads, and it's like taking care of your vehicle. You really need to once a year make sure you go through it. Thank you. I had a couple questions if you know this. There's some new technology out there on how we can save money, and it involves grinding up glass,
Mm-hmm.
grinding up pavement, and grinding up cement. Do you have any experience or recommendations in that technology?
I don't currently. You should come to our roundtables this year, right? We're having one that's on that topic. So we're going to discuss what can be done in our municipalities and see what the possibilities are for glass.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're not doing an awful lot in this with dealing with the subsurface. And those are some decisions, there may be some cost savings in that. And as has been pointed, as Aaron just mentioned, it has been brought to our attention in regards, relative to looking, especially towns in this portion of our region seem to be very interested in the possibilities of using some other materials as foundation, possibly whether you can utilize it in surface material, incorporate it into surface material. And we'll be having some folks, this will probably be in January that we'll be having a roundtable session on that, and we're actually going to try and combine it with the transportation technical advisory committee, so that we can get both the solid waste people and the transportation folks having some dialogue on this, as well as getting in some folks from the solid waste world and the transportation world to lead some information and discussions on that.
So
Jim.
I remember years ago there was a big talk about grinding up tires and putting in the pavement so it'd be more flexible and less cracking.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really heard much more about it after that. I don't know if it failed or what happened.
My understanding, I've heard that in other parts of the world they have done that. There are some limits to that, and we will look into that. we'll look in, I don't know the details, but we will look into it for that.
I'm aware of a couple of projects the state did,
Yeah,
and they found it was extremely slippery, and the accident rate went up. And
Yeah.
there's a place not far from here that happened.
So it would be helpful, I think, to have, we have a copy of that sheet without the two end columns, the total and the
Yep.
percentages, so it'd be helpful to have that.
I'll send this
Yeah.
one along.
And secondly, let's assume for a moment that we pick the quarter mile of North Line Road, which is where I started. In scenario number 2, you've got $91,000 worth of chip sealing in 2019. In scenario number 3, about 41,000, and then 12,000 in minor crack sealing, and major crack sealing in the second algorithm here, or proposal is 4,000. Do you give us what your recommendation for that quarter mile is? I mean, you've classified it red.
Yep.
So now when you send us the information, we've told you we're gonna do that quarter mile. Do you tell us within this program, what were your assumptions about what we were gonna do?
So I come up with the reason I got those numbers and those pricing is because I do assign, like this one is a crack seal for Brown Road, the first segment of it. So
Okay.
there is assigned for every year. This is what would be done in 2022, is this list of treatments for
Okay.
each segment of the road. So it's a guide to work with on what you can do for each year and the pricing that would go along with it.
Great.
The pricing's just broken down into those different categories in that sheet.
So one question that this doesn't directly provide information about, looks at 10 years, gives us a road condition, but, and the highest cost option gives us the overall best result, as you would expect. But in the next 5 years after that, are we then, how do the roads look in each of the scenarios? So, and I know in the software that's not doing that, but that's
Right.
always something
Yeah.
to be concerned
Yeah.
about, okay? That we might say, well, you know, the middle of the road, okay, so your worst is 63% at the end of 10 years, but, and going forward from there, are we then looking at some accelerated increases in the road maintenance and replacement budget to make up for some things that are at that point coming due?
Erin mentioned when she first showed this slide and went through it, she did mention that with that middle scenario, in the last couple of years, a good deal of road surface was being treated. And you can treat a lot of road surface if you're doing the really low cost, patch it up and just do a temporary fix on it. And so we've had some discussions on this. Yes, it gets you to a certain point, but it's a bit of a Band-Aid in that last little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so by the end of the 10 years, all those shorter lifespan fixes are now starting to catch up with each other. And that's kind of what I noticed. The majority, this is the lowest PCI, but there's a lot more in the lower range than there would be in the higher range. So eventually, it's gonna catch up that you're gonna have to do some of those more expensive fixes. Looking at the 10 years, it works, but I can't tell you exactly what it's gonna be after that. It might be a lot of more expensive fixes.
Question. Currently, right now, when we do full depth reclamation,
Mhm.
we put down a like a 4-inch base coat. And then the following year, we put down the finish coat on top of that. Is that something that you guys recommend? And do you have that, is that cost figured out in this?
This just says it's done in 1 year. So I can't personally recommend how to go about doing a full depth. I just know pricing and how long it's supposed to last, and that it lumps it into 1 year. So it says it's a 4-inch pavement for full depth, and then after that, I don't know the details that go into how much more they take into consideration.
But as far as you know, in the state system, they don't have an estimator that includes the base coat, top coat that we have been favoring.
I'm not sure how much yours differs from other towns and municipalities and state roads. So I'm not sure on the comparative pricing for that.
It makes no difference whether we wait a year to put the top coat on or whether it's all done the same year. That's just a matter of money and whether you want to do it. Are you aware of any science that says do it one way?
I'm
or
not
the
the road pavement engineer, but I would assume that a top coat after you do your treatment would seal out anything that would get into the pavement.
other?
The one thing that I was taught, at T-squared was if you put down your base coat the first year, let it go through the whole winter season. If it has any movement, if it has any settling or movement anywhere, when you do your top coat, it corrects it.
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
That makes
And I've been
sense.
seeing that it's
Yeah.
happening more and more
Presumably-
on people's driveways now, on new house. They're actually doing that, even on driveways. They're during construction,
Mhm.
it can get beat up and
I
then you
would
wait till
go with
everything's
what-
done and do the final
Yeah.
coat.
T-squared recommends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I suppose the other thing is, let's say we get a bad area on the first year, an area particularly that's not just unlevel, but you come back and you see that there are some
Issues.
underlying issues that didn't get addressed, you can tear that out, redo that before you put the top coat on as well, although I don't know that you've run into any of that, where you've had to go back and redo base coat area.
Just for your information,
Yeah.
since Jim has been our road agent,
Mhm.
he's gone on a program of fog lines and yellow lines. And on Ledge Hill Road, there's 2 examples. When you turn and go up past the school, the former road agents were patching that every year. Now, the traffic goes a little wider. Dame Road, Ham Hill was really bad. The trucks would track in there and break down. He can go a year, I think, with no problems. Well, if the tire isn't breaking up, water's not getting in there. So
Yeah.
there's some strategies that he's used that
Mhm.
make sense.
And like I said, if you find that you look at something and it just doesn't fit with what you do, then next year we'll check in and we'll change it in our system on what's happening.
Well, my biggest thing was, I was wondering if it was, the cost was in here. You know what I mean? Does it take this into consideration for a top coat or not? It's kind of.
I can find out about that.
Okay.
And did you take into consideration when the roads had been done, for instance, looking at a schedule of paving from 2012 or 2010?
I did not look at
So
that.
you didn't age our current paving?
No. I looked at what it is currently,
Right.
and then using those conditions, the forecasting system usually knows edge cracking can eventually form into the middle of the road, and it takes all of that into consideration. It would be really difficult to capture the entire history of the road.
But you have a pretty good history on when roads were paved, at least during your tenure.
Mine, plus I do go back, I think I have information going back for probably 5 more years, so.
So
we go back
that's something
16
that we
years.
can look at, is based upon historical information we know, as we look at some of these yellow and red segments, when was it last paved? And that'll give us an idea of if the past is a predictor of the future, which for the most part it is, how some of these things are going to progress going forward.
Yeah.
Can I go back to your key?
Mhm.
The numbers, 0 to 44, that's 44% of the roads are red, correct?
No. Nope.
What does that mean?
That just means that the PCI, for the red segments, the PCI lies between that range.
The
The
pavement
current
condition.
pavement condition.
Yep. So currently, the red segments on that map are in poor condition. And so you'd have to look at the map and to see about how much of the town is red.
And then we can go back into the detail and see in those segments exactly what it is that's driving the cost, the condition down.
You can see what the condition is,
Right.
yeah.
I don't know if it would be helpful. Just the link.
And the lifespan numbers are, I'm just pick one. FDR and HMA 4-inch,
Mhm.
168 months, that's also a New Hampshire number.
Yep, all of that,
Okay.
that entire form was created with T-squared, all state paving.
So we can answer the waiting a year question ourselves, actually, because if we know what we did,
Yep.
and we know how old or how long ago we paved, we can see if it falls within that rubric
Right.
of the aging.
So,
Yeah.
what you do now is the base coat is 4 inches, is that right?
Actually, I think it's 4 inches, but compacted down to 3.
Okay. So what you're doing is a full depth reclamation and 3 inches of asphalt. And then the next year you're coming back with a 1-inch overlay. Is that correct?
Yeah. Somehow
So-
they tell you that,
Right.
that they're
But
putting down more.
Looking at these, at the maintenance procedures in here, we're combining two.
For example, Carroll, in last year's information they gave us, they said it was a 2.5-inch base coat and a 2-inch finish coat. That's the figures that they gave.
I think that's after, once it's been compacted. Because I guess
Compacted.
when they put down, I say 4 inches, it compacts down, it might be 1.5 inches or something.
Yeah. So that I guess from a cost standpoint is what, and from a procedural standpoint, it's a combination of two of these is the approach that we've been.
I'll double check on what they include in the full depth, but I don't want to say it with certainty, but I think that they include the entire process of that treatment in that pricing. But I'll double check on that.
Now, we did work with one community that told us at the outset, look, we're applying for funds that would basically give them a $500,000, what was it? No, it wasn't that much, but they were anticipating an extra $100,000 or whatever $100,000 boost for 1 year. We did not incorporate that into this. We looked at a progressive 10% or lower increase. We can't exactly say what the town of Tuftonboro exactly wants to do. I know that there have been numbers thrown around in terms of, gee, how much could we spend on this? But we tend to work in let's look at 10 years, and the whole point is not to have any spikes in budgeting. Yes, you're going to run into sections of road that are going to be a challenge, and you're going to have to modify plans on this. And don't, so these were the three scenarios that we ended up coming up with. If any of them seem like we need to get from you before we create the full report with details and full maps and the detailed spreadsheets. Once you tell us this is the direction we want to go with, the scenario that we think is most appropriate, then we can get you all that information in a report and in spreadsheets and maps and that sort of thing that you can then work off of.
One of the problems I have too is no matter how well we make the town of Tuftonboro roads, we also have to drive down the state roads to get to a gas station. And it kind of is discouraging when that happens.
That's simple. We don't vote for the frauds that are our current legislators,
Yeah.
right? We have the power to change the legislature. It certainly make our job difficult, not just roads.
Yeah.
Make them feel bad about their roads. Make yours look real good, and then they'll be like, they'll have to step up their game.
I don't think they have the shame to worry about it.
No.
And there are good people there.
Are there any more questions?
Nice job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll, if you could get me that expanded report. We've got a budget committee meeting next week, I think, isn't
I think you're meeting on the 15th, right?
it? 15. And I'd like to run this all by them to
Mhm.
get kind of some feedback from the budget committee as to what direction they'd like to see us
Okay.
go. And then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we need to,
Gives us ammo.
it would help, I think, for us to be able to look at the detail
Mhm.
as well.
Okay.
And,
For the full detail for a particular scenario?
Yeah, I mean, if you just pick
existing.
one, you've got all the roads listed by the quarter mile
Mhm.
and what needs to be done, and it would be nice to take a look at for the last two. I mean, I don't see putting 10 grand a year in this problem is gonna
I
solve
think what you
anything.
demonstrated with the $10,000 a year scenario is that we will continue to see deterioration in the roads. That for adding that, we cannot improve the overall
Mhm.
condition of our roads. So
Yep.
I agree with you. It makes no sense to say, yeah, this is, we're gonna buy into this.
I mean, we'll end up putting $10,000 a year just for inflation.
Yeah,
Or if you get a
right.
fuel spike.
Yes.
Right.
So I think if we looked at scenario 2 and scenario 3 in detail, we could probably figure out what direction we want to go. I think.
And I think once you fall behind on this thing too, it's gonna be very expensive to get caught back up.
Right.
I think we wanna stay ahead of the curve on this one.
Yeah, I can send you those full reports.
Thank you.
Great.
And then I would like for you guys to tell me which one, so I can send you the final report with maps and everything on which one makes more sense for you.
You know, I think we have to kind of go through the process a little bit more, the budgeting process at least. So I wouldn't think much before January or February, before we'd be close to
Okay.
having that nailed down.
Okay.
I mean, unless you think it would move faster.
Well, I guess it depends upon how many iterations we're gonna go through in terms of saying let's face
I
it,
mean,
what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the detail in the scenario, and we're gonna look at it, and it's gonna give us a good sense for the scenario as it's set is appropriate, or we wanna shift the players around a little bit within the scenario.
There's another thought. There's a budget committee, there's a CIP committee that wants some finality and some decisions made, especially CIP, so that before Thanksgiving, they can print their report. And, you know, I want to work at my own speed, but I'm also aware that there are other people that are waiting for us. And I mean that in a positive vein, Mr.
So
Chairman.
I guess for this year, if we were looking at this, just year one, 2019, we're only talking about the difference between $210,000 warrant article or $221,000 warrant article. So I think we could probably come up with that decision pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then it's a matter of how we're going to push it out 10 years for the CIP folks and their strange financial algorithm. Yeah. So it may be sooner than Christmas.
Okay.
We'll keep you posted.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the details of scenario 2 versus scenario 3, if you're talking about, I mean, it can show, yes, you can get into individual segments, and yeah, the first part of North Line Road absolutely needs some work. And that's going to show in either scenario. There are sort of then middle of the road, pardon the pun. I mean, we know that Union Wharf Road is in really nice condition at this point, and is going to need some attention at some point in the next 10 years. Then there are other roads that are somewhere in between. Exactly what path, both of these scenarios make some recommendations about all the roads and treatment on them. Exactly when that happens and what decisions are made on them, the exact decisions fall upon the town, the road agent and the town selectmen. These are guides. And in terms of the modeling process, when you change one thing, it's like a spider web. You change one thing, and it's going to impact something else. And just
For example, if I had cracks, or let's just say even an overlay for a segment of a road, and it was decided that you want to do full depth for that year, you're now going to be maybe $15,000–$20,000 over budget that year. So changing one segment of a road can change the budget a lot.
Mhm.
But if you track the three scenarios that you've constructed here, there's no real separation financially until the 5th year. And that's when the numbers start to spread apart. So the initial impact's pretty minimal. And then even at year 5, if you're in scenario 2, you're only talking about $30,000 difference from a $10,000 increase, but you're up to $75,000 for scenario 3. So it is a gradual impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does this take into consideration the current amount that's already used for the town? For instance, it's above that. What is it, like 265 now?
No.
That we 200 in paving this year.
Yeah.
Plus we.
Oh, right, and then the other
Okay,
side.
road
Okay, I just
versus
wanted,
road
just was kind of
improvement
seeing
and
that, see if
stuff.
these numbers are real for the.
Construction money came out.
Right.
Okay, I understand that, okay.
Right. I'm good.
Okay, all right.
You guys
All
good?
right.
Yep,
Thank you.
You're
Thanks so
welcome.
much.
thank you, Aaron. Dave?
You bet. So
Thank you.
Aaron will be getting some information about a couple of questions, getting a a detail of the scenario 2 and scenario 3?
Yeah, so it's just gonna be an Excel sheet. It's not gonna be really pretty right now, but I can, once you choose a scenario, I can make it a little bit nicer, I guess. Because there's a lot of work that goes into some of these spreadsheets.
Well, the slide that you showed us, which
Yeah.
just illustrates each quarter mile,
Mm-hmm.
something like that would work.
Yes.
That's
Yep, I can do
yeah.
that.
Great.
Okay,
Do we have anything else there,
we do.
Father?
We do. We have some, and I think you've seen this
Yeah.
recommendation. We received 2 bids for the design of the new fire station. One was received by,
Police station.
I'm sorry, what did I say? Fire, oh, no, police station, new police station.
People at home get
I'm
crazy.
sitting in the fire station, we don't need to do one of those. One of those arrived after the deadline for submission, and the town attorney has provided us with an approach to go forward that I think is a solid approach.
I
In
agree.
terms of sending both of these bidders who submitted bids a letter explaining the situation, and if they both agree that they're fine with both of them being considered, then we'll go forward and have our meeting with each of the potential contractors, and we'll make our decision based upon the information and the process we do with them. If they're not in agreement, then I see there's 2 approaches. The first is you have one bid that
Thank you.
met the requirement, and we could go forward with that, or we can rebid, solicit, and I guess
Yeah, I don't like
it's
the
always
idea of
better, it's always
having
better to
one-
have more than one bid.
Right. And I don't think, I mean, I'll just mention that it wasn't their fault that their bid was late. It seemed, they put it in next day mail and that ends up getting here 3 days later, so.
Yep,
I move we take the sample letter and send it.
okay.
I'll second.
So we're asking them for a response back in a week, and they ought to be able to respond in that period of time.
Yes.
And then we can deal with it in time to meet with them at our next meeting,
Okay.
which is not until the 19th.
That sounds right.
Yeah, or if it makes sense, we can do a work session in between.
I like your idea of multiple submissions.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's, I mean, we
Makes
haven't
sense.
met these people yet, and I hate to buy.
right.
Well, I want you to see
Huh?
Are you all set with me, or do you have
Huh?
something?
No,
I see.
I think we're good for today.
Lang Pond Road was silky smooth the other day.
Silky
What did you do to that?
Looks good.
God,
Okay,
felt
All right,
great.
thank you, Jim.
thank you. And,
All right,
I'll be right out.
Okay.
so, and we're gonna have Rick send this letter, correct?
I don't think it was strict, whatever you want to do, I can send it on behalf of the selectmen. He recommended an email.
I'm sorry?
He recommended an email be
Yeah.
sent to each company, and I'd be glad to do that if you'd like, unless you'd rather it come from him.
I mean, we could get it all official and do it by the mail, but everybody would agree by email.
Then it won't get, it'll
Yeah,
be
all right,
delivered
well,
later.
so why don't you send it
Okay.
by email from us? And I think that's all we have to deal with today.
I think
Right,
so.
anything else?
I hope I'm not forgetting,
We're
but yeah.
meeting it on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
And we're gonna
Then
meet
again
out
on
there, right?
Tuesday.
Yes. Yeah,
It's
Love
like
it,
a
Lang, that's
full-time
right.
job.
yeah,
I move we adjourn.
all right,
I'll second.
thank you, gentlemen.
That was a nice presentation.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. I think
Chip and I